Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning back in to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. I'm Scott McNally, and today I have a segment for Muscle Minds with Dr. Scott Stevenson. Scott's going to explain to us how metformin could be having a negative impact on muscle gains. Now, if you're not familiar with what metformin is, it is a prescription drug. It's a glucose disposal agent. It's used for blood sugar control by diabetics. It's also used by bodybuilders to help to get leaner when they're cutting, as well as to stave off fat gain during their off season. If you guys enjoy this show, then do me a favor, hit the like button, leave us a comment, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because we have several programs coming out each week. We'd love to have you along for all of them.
Let's see, I sent you some figures. The very first one I sent this morning, the Hormetic Bell curve optimizing training dose. 3 different levels of recovery.
I think this is it. Yep.
Yeah, it's got the red, black, and green lines.
All right.
So
I got that up. What are we looking at here?
So that shows just above the horizontal line there is a positive adaptive response, meaning you're getting stronger, you're getting bigger.
Okay.
Below that is you're going the opposite way. You'd be like actually literally overtraining. Performance is going down. You're losing muscle mass. And what that shows is, though, for a cumulative training dose, so let's say you just keep your sets, fail your sets, X amount of them for a given muscle group of the whole body, however you want to conceptualize it.
Okay.
Kind of all the same. The black line would be maybe the average person. So you can add more and more sets until at some point in time, given your recovery level, all the things that allow you to come back, adapt to the stimulus of training, gives you a peak there. The highest point on that black line. That's your optimal that's your optimal training stimulus.
Okay.
For adapting given the person's recovery level. You go beyond that and you see the line starts heading back down, and eventually you try to do, let's say, 5 sets. You can get away with 5 sets twice a week for a given individual, and then they start going to 6 sets and 7 sets. They're not quite recovering quite as well. They're not adapting as well. The strength is going up as well.
Yeah.
Some of that could be just a function of accumulating fatigue over the course of a training blast or a mesocycle. But eventually, just very generally speaking, you try to go to 8 sets or 10 sets twice a week. Eventually, it's just too much. You can't adapt to that at all. This is what Mike Israetel refers to. He's talking about maximal adaptive volume, maximum recoverable volume.
Okay.
Those sorts of things. Those are his terms.
Now, does this relate to metformin?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure does. We're getting there.
Okay.
Right.
Just making sure that I'm on the right page with you here.
No, you are.
Okay.
So part of that stimulus, something when we go into the gym, there's a number of things that are involved. The inflammation, the mechanical disruption, obviously tension is important here. There's also a free radical stress that is brought on. When you train like that, you have inflammation. You can use NSAIDs like naproxen or aspirin. Those will reduce all of the immediate responses. Pretty much the immediate responses you see, things like protein synthesis doesn't get increased as much. Mm-hmm. Protein breakdown doesn't get increased as much. You want both of those to go up. You won't see the same level of satellite cell proliferation. You don't see the same level of prostaglandins that are involved with inflammation, because that's what nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories do. They block the rate-limiting enzyme for production of those.
Yeah.
And sometimes, in many of the studies, when you give an anti-inflammatory, you blunt muscle growth. There's actually a study with older folks where they gave an anti-inflammatory and they had greater muscle growth. So if we go back to that figure and imagine an older person who is prone to inflammation,
mm-hmm.
and for them, for the training they're doing in a study, their adaptive responses beyond that optimum point, beyond the peak, they're coming back downwardly. And now you blunt the stimulus by taking a nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory. You blunt the inflammation. You blunt the insult brought on by the training. That moves them back to the left, so they have more optimal adaptation, potentially.
Yeah.
So that goes for things involved with inflammation, and one of those is also free radical stress comes about. So let's throw up that next plot.
Okay.
It should look very familiar, and we're getting closer to the answer to metformin.
Okay. This is another bell curve?
Another bell curve, yeah.
Got it up.
So these are all from my book, the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book. But what they found is if you give like mega doses, like a gram of vitamin C with like 400 IUs of vitamin E, acetyl L-cysteine will do the same thing. Someone who's like really worried about, let's say someone's taking orals, and they're taking like a liver protector that has acetyl L-cysteine and alpha lipoic acid would be so worried about, but silymarin, mainly most of the ingredients that are in there are they have free radical quenching abilities. So if we look at that figure, if you quench the free radical stress by using antioxidants, we're not talking about something you get from like an orange, or eating fruits and vegetables. We're talking about supplemental, like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C is equivalent to like 20 or 30 oranges or something like that. Like 60 milligrams of vitamin C in an orange. So you'd have to eat like 20 oranges. You have to be eating like just, bushels of oranges in order to get that.
Right.
So it's very easy to quench that free radical stress, and that will impair adaptation. We know that happens in terms of endurance exercise. In fact, you'll blunt the increase in insulin sensitivity that comes from just doing cardio. But doing cardio, like that's a good, insulin sensitivity is a good thing, generally speaking. Doesn't happen. So one of the things we also know is, and I don't have a figure for this, is that so there's an interesting, so here's kind of where the conundrum comes in play. People use metformin with the idea that is going to improve insulin sensitivity, which generally speaking is a sign of health. It's something that's a good thing for people who are diabetics, who have out of control glucose, blood glucose levels. Having elevated glucose will tend to cause glycation agents. Basically, the glucose will end up having some undesirable effects on protein glycosylation. High glucose is definitely not good for your kidneys as well. All the things that come with diabetes, high glucose doesn't help very much. So I'm going to bypass some of those ideas and go right to the fact that metformin does seem to help people with diabetes, but bodybuilders take it because they want to become better bodybuilders. And what has actually been found now is that one of the things that metformin does is acts as an antioxidant. If you're someone who's a diabetic, you're going to tend to have increased free radical stress, increased inflammation. That's probably helping to a certain degree. If you're healthy otherwise, and you give metformin and you're blocking free radicals, you're taking an antioxidant, guess what? You can run into problems where you don't get those adaptations to exercise. And that's what that first title that from original paper that I sent with Konopka is the first author. Metformin inhibits mitochondrial adaptations to aerobic exercise training in older adults. This is not good. So this is an issue. Let's say you're and what this could possibly mean actually is that you don't get better insulin sensitivity when you take metformin and you do aerobic training.
Okay.
It actually can counter the insulin sensitivity effect that you get from endurance exercise if you're taking metformin and doing training. So typically that's not a problem with someone who has poor endurance, who has poor insulin sensitivity, who's a diabetic. They're already behind the ball, so to speak. So they need all the help they can get. But if you're someone who is using metformin and also doing some cardio and you're healthy, the metformin could actually be undoing the effects of the cardio.
No kidding.
In terms of insulin sensitivity, yes.
No kidding.
That's what this is pointing towards.
Yeah.
Because it has a free radical quenching effect.
Huh.
So one of the other things that people have been concerned about when it comes to metformin, this is sort of a detailed story. I cover this in my book. People can go and read that. If you look at that AMP signaling pathway figure, I just stole this from Google. Sorry, there's kind of a site there. This is not like proprietary. There's so much information out there on activating AMPK.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that metformin does, it does a plethora of things. It impacts the microbiome. It has this antioxidant effect.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the main things it's known for is basically acting like an exercise analog, an exercise mimetic. So exercise increases energy demand, and a lot of what's coordinated in the cell related to energy demand, the demand for energy to fuel the exercise,
Mm-hmm.
comes through this AMP kinase, adenosine monophosphate kinase enzyme
Yeah.
that controls, in large part, sort of an energy sensor in the cell. Metformin turns that on, and when you have energy demand in the cell, this means the cell is going to be catabolic. It's using up fuel so it can provide ATP. This is the opposite of what you get when you're building up muscle cells. When you have an anabolic process, the opposite of catabolic process, you've got plenty of energy around, you're at rest. Obviously, you're not building muscle when you're in the gym training. You're building it when you're recovering, especially when you're sleeping, for instance, when the energy demand is as low as it can possibly get. You've just got your basic metabolic rate that's running. As it turns out, AMPK is inhibitory of mammalian target rapamycin, and mTOR. Everyone talks about mTOR. mTOR is important for protein synthesis. So in that figure here, you'll see metformin activating AMPK, and then there's another red line with a right angle block
Mm-hmm.
instead of an arrow. That means it's blocking mTOR.
Mm.
Activating AMPK blocks mTOR and turns off protein synthesis.
I'll be damned.
That makes sense. You're not trying to turn on protein synthesis when you're running. For
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
It's not actually happening when you're actually training. It's the fact that you created a stimulus. So that's always kind of been like, what's going on? Metformin could potentially block mTOR
Mm-hmm.
and thus be an issue for muscle building. Well, there goes the phone again. As it turns out, there's a little more complication. There's different subunits of the AMPK enzyme that are turned on by metformin, and that was kind of a maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But actually, as it turns out, metformin. There's some other studies. I don't have anything to show anybody here. There's other studies showing that metformin actually blocks mTOR directly, not via this AMPK mediated mechanism. Has its own way of doing that doesn't have to do with AMPK. And if we go to this last thing that I sent you, this is an article from, I think, 2019. Another study with older folks. I'm not going to study bodybuilders. They should be healthy if they're young adults. So we look at older folks who could use the benefits of exercise more than your average younger person.
Which one is this?
Metformin blunts. This is the last one with Walton as the first author. Metformin blunts muscle hypertrophy in response to progressive resistance exercise in older adults.
It might be this one. There we go.
Yeah, the last figure I sent you today. So
Got it up.
it looks just like the other one because
Yeah.
it's from the same journal.
Yeah.
So this is another piece of information. Now we actually have, in older adults at least, the idea that metformin blunts muscle growth, and it actually blunted strength gains in these older folks. These were not unhealthy people. These were healthy older adults who would typically put on some muscle mass. In the placebo group, they did.
Okay.
And that could be at least a couple reasons. One, a direct impact on mTOR that metformin has, which has been demonstrated in some other studies. I cite those in my book.
Yeah.
As well as metformin, as I mentioned before, is an antioxidant.
Mm-hmm.
So at a very basic root level, it's going to blunt, it's going to protect against free radical stress.
Yeah.
But we want free radical stress to some degree. We want stress. That's the whole point of going to the gym, is to create a stress to which we adapt.
Yeah.
If we blunt the stress by taking too much metformin, that's what the dose was here. So there may be some sort of a dose type of thing.
Okay.
Related, maybe that if you take too much, maybe too little, you can find maybe a happy zone to some degree. The problem can be, if you're like looking at half-life. Let's just take the short-acting metformin. There's a long-acting version, which is easier on the gut for most of the short-acting. Some people it just screws up their gut. Too bad for them to use. But maybe you could take it, time it at times away from your workout. What's more important than so much the half-life, in the blood at least, is what's going on inside the cell, and that's kind of a crapshoot as far as I know. So we're a long ways from figuring that out, especially with actual studies looking at timing of metformin and its impact on muscle growth. That's so much of an investment to dig in and do an actual study, and then look at different groups that took metformin at different times relative to the training. So the point here is that people taking metformin, and this is one we mentioned before, this is sort of like a follow-up on a previous topic we've talked about. People ask about metformin. Should I take it in the off season to keep from getting fat, maybe by keeping my insulin sensitivity higher? Maybe elevating my metabolic rate a little bit by turning on AMPK.
Right.
Basically shifting my metabolism towards that of someone who's being more active. Well, I've always drawn it. I think it makes sense. There are people who can do cardio in the off season. They can get on the stepper, and they still make great gains in their legs.
Sure.
There's people who can do cardio, boatloads of cardio, in their pre-contest period in order to drop fat, and they don't lose the leg size. And then some people, their legs wither away. They just can't do it. Same thing probably goes with metformin. Some people can take it, and they find it keeps them leaner at whatever dose they use. Doesn't seem to impair muscle growth. And others, nope, just can't do it. They're, for whatever reason, their genetics, the nature of their stimulus, the way the stimulus is balanced with recovery, if they, on that hormetic curve, take the metformin, it may blunt the stimulus so much that the stimulus isn't enough to produce much of adaptive response at all.
I'm telling you, man, I've seen it. I have seen it. I've seen it, and I mentioned it on previous episodes. But a guy that I really looked up to, a guy that I competed against, and he beat me for like the next year. I didn't even know who he was yet. We hadn't become friends yet. I just had a vision of him in my head when I trained, because I was like, I got to be better than that guy next time. And we ended up becoming good friends, and I ended up coaching him because I could bring conditioning. He has some incredible size. We're going to put our brains together.
Guy,
And he came to me and he was like, hey, man, I've been eating all this food. He'd been working with another coach, and they were hammering the food hard. And he was taking a high dose metformin, and at the end of the day, he didn't really make too much progress once we got him back in shape. For how much food he had eaten, using this high dose metformin, he didn't really change that much. And I'd have to think then, Scott, with what you're telling me, maybe everybody has a different response, but the more you take, the more you're likely to have a bad response here. You know what I mean? The higher your dose, put it this way, the lower your dose, the better your chance would be to still gain, I would think,
Right. So that's the thing. It's the same. People just, everyone knows cardio. Like, should you do cardio in the off season? Should you not?
Yeah.
So if you're an endomorph who just tends to get fat really easy, just using that,
right.
The somatotypes are kind of like fluffy, but if you're, what did Matt Poore used to call them? If you're husky, a husky person.
Yeah.
Remember Matt used to use those terms? Like, there's some utility to those ideas. You gain body fat relatively easily, but you also gain muscle relatively easy. For you, the muscle mass isn't the issue. It's keeping the body fat under control.
Yeah.
Cardio might be a smart choice.
Yeah.
You can do that for the reasons of insulin sensitivity or what have you. For some of those people or along those lines, for some individuals, metformin, for people who tend to lose insulin sensitivity as they gain, might be something that would not impair muscle growth substantially.
That makes sense.
Them. Whereas other people, maybe gaining muscle is just, they have to fight tooth and nail for every ounce. Metformin and lots of cardio is not something you want to do.
Yeah.
You got someone who comes to you who's rail thin, who's naturally like 7% body fat, and they can't gain muscle. Like you look at them and you're like, you are just made to be thin. Like you're probably a really good endurance athlete just naturally.
Yeah.
You don't want to have them like, okay, let's do an hour and a half of cardio and take 1,000 milligrams of metformin a day. It's just not going to make sense.
Yeah.
They're not going to get the muscle mass. Body fat is not their issue. So it's not impossible that you could have someone who has mixes of those two types of issues. Maybe you don't gain muscle very well and you gain fat easily too. Yeah. It's possible. You have to, then other strategies may need to come into play. But the thing is, we look back at those hormetic curves that we put up, is that where you are on that stimulus and adaptation bell curve is at least to some degree, it's a nice mnemonic or a nice way to conceptualize what the metformin might do, at least for instance as an antioxidant. Mm-hmm. So if you are someone who is training really, really hard, this is what I think may have been going on with this study with older folks, is they were so prone to inflammation that for the training regime they were handed, on average, using an anti-inflammatory brought down the relative stress brought on by the inflammation of the training to a point that was more optimal for muscle growth compared to a placebo who was probably doing too much training to optimize muscle growth. So it could be for some people that, some people can get away with taking an aspirin. I know of a competitor who would take, what is it, NyQuil PM? Is that the one with diphenhydramine and ibuprofen? Yeah, and every day, every night. And still grew great. That wasn't a problem.
Huh, okay.
But the person trained really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
So that may have been unwittingly something that had just fallen into the regime. It helps with sleep, which is important. Mm-hmm. Taking the diphenhydramine to help them sleep. But also the anti-inflammatory may have been countering what was otherwise excessive inflammation from training a bit more than would have otherwise been optimal.
Yeah.
So they were balancing out an excessive inflammatory response to the training by taking a little bit of ibuprofen at night. Mm-hmm. So could be that metformin could help some people in that regard.
Yeah.
Let's say someone's really prone to free radical induced stress, and they also tend to gain body fat. So they get sore and they tend to gain body fat really easily. For them, metformin might be not a bad idea. It's got somewhat of it's an antioxidant to some degree. Mm-hmm. It might push them from too far to the right back towards that more optimal point in terms of free radical stress, as well as help with insulin sensitivity in their case.
Yeah, I know it's become more and more popular with anti-aging.
Yes,
metformin.
Yeah, and it has those effects like in rats. Is like that's part of what you see with diabetics.
Yeah,
is that it increases life expectancy.
Interesting.
But diabetics, that's the thing with if someone is not a diabetic, because those people with diabetics tend to be more inflammatory in nature. Mm-hmm. They're at a different spot on that relative amount of inflammation that they're experiencing. So metformin is sliding them along that scale. Mm-hmm. They're not worried about their exercise adaptations are actually important for them if they're combining the metformin with exercise. Mm-hmm. So it's moving them along that scale, and that's the thing we constantly. I say we, like I'm thinking of podcasters, scientists, even. Just in a very general way, people who are looking at what is the effect of exercise, training regime, supplement, some pharmaceutical on an adaptation, we tend to think of that in a very linear fashion, as if the dose response is directly linear and then maybe it just plateaus off. Mm-hmm. But at least as far as exercise goes, there's so much suggesting there's a hormetic response. So in the right amount, you can have even things that are toxic. Free radicals are toxic if they're too much. The devil's in the dose. This is where this saying comes from. You can use like gamma radiation and in small amounts that normally that's mutating radiation. That's not good for your DNA. That'll cause cancer and all sorts of shit.
Yeah.
But in small enough amounts, it will evoke an adaptive response that is protective against cancer.
Or turn you into the Incredible Hulk.
That
too.
There you go.
Could happen.
Yeah. Right. I mean, people like, there's another kind of example. It's related, slightly different mechanisms, but people who are snake handlers they will kind of vaccinate themselves. They'll inoculate themselves, I think is the correct word, against venom from poisonous snakes by starting off with small doses and gradually giving themselves more and more and more of it.
Yeah.
So their body builds up a defense against that.
Yeah.
So in small enough amounts, you adapt to those further amounts. And, where you are in terms of what you can handle is going to be a function of your training status or how much snake venom you've been adding to your system at a regular basis, as well as what your innate capability is for handling a given amount of that particular stress or toxin.
Yeah.
Some people can train and like Brandon Curry, this was so informative when he had said this, talking about guys that come over to Oxygen Gym to the Middle East, and those who make it are the ones who can just handle that massive training volume.
Yeah.
If you can handle all that training volume, then you can recover from that stimulus. It means you've got a greater stimulus, which is going to produce a greater amount of growth. But if you can't, so if you throw back, if you could, that first figure that I had, that I sent you, the very first hormesis curve one.
Okay. Got it.
So the Brandon Currys of the world, the really good bodybuilders of the world, as long as they're motivated to train really, really hard, are the ones who have that excellent recovery, the green dotted line.
Yeah.
They can train with higher volume. They can they have a higher cumulative dose of training that they can recover from. So their peak is going to be further along in terms of what they can adapt from. Is going to be higher. They'll have a higher positive adaptive response than someone who's got poor recovery, for instance, who can't handle as much volume. So you still have the same phenomenon with everyone. There's a dose response that eventually, gets past the point of optimal recovery to where it's just too much. But if you got great genetics, you can see there's a little bit of difference there for any given amount. If you just inch your way along from left to right on that horizontal axis, you can see for a given amount of training dose, you've got a greater adaptive response in the green line versus the red line. The green line's above the red line all the way out. And the green line also has a higher peak, and that higher peak comes at a higher cumulative training dose. Because that person has better genetics, they grow better from any given amount of training, and they can handle more training, and they can grow better overall from more training, and they can recover from it. And they can even take a look at this. So see where I don't have any units on these graphs, they would just be arbitrary, but look at the peak for poor recovery. It's about half as high as it is for the peak for excellent recovery.
Right.
So, and now look at again, there's no units here, but look at where the poor recovery peak happens on the dose, that horizontal, and then read that peak for poor recovery all the way to the right, so where it matches the downward slope for excellent recovery. And then look at the cumulative dose there. That cumulative training dose is like twice. I mean, it's just totally hypothetical.
Right.
So if you look at those plots, again, this actually kind of matches real world. I didn't intend this at all when I drew these, or just go to hand drawn, but just to emphasize the point. But you might have someone who can go in, you pick up Flex magazine in days of old, and you've got all these pro bodybuilders who have excellent genetics. They grew like weeds from the beginning, most of them, and they're doing 30 sets a week, 20 sets a week, or whatever, and they're maybe growing better from twice the training volume that the average person would need to get their optimal response.
Right.
And they're still growing better.
Yeah.
So they could be growing even more from doing less, potentially, which some find as they get better, like Dorian Yates did. So anyway, there's a lot there to kind of glean from that, even though that's not doesn't come from any actual data. There are some studies demonstrating this kind of thing. Actually, unfortunately, one of those at least was retracted. There's a Barbalo study that was done. There's a few studies from that lab that had been pulled back out of the literature because they had some issues with the veracity of the data.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a big deal. They flubbed a few things.
A little drama in the research world.
Yeah, shit happens. It does happen. Which I really like. It was such a bummer because it was it was important data, in answering they addressed some important questions.
Yeah.
In this dose response arena here, and they didn't answer them honestly.
Yeah.
That was the problem. Yeah. So.
All right. Well, listen. Let's.
Anyway, so that's a little story on the metformin. Just give people follow up is that it can impair recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and like I said, man, I feel like I didn't know why, but I could see it just in my own experiences with people. Yeah. I'd seen it in my own.
It actually enhances recovery, perhaps too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said that the wrong way. It actually enhances recovery in a certain way, or prevents the stimulus.
Right.
So yeah. So it's not the best choice for many people.
Okay.
We'll just say it that way.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, let's wrap up here because we've gone pretty deep on a couple of topics here. I know we had some other stuff. If you wouldn't mind if we nailed that out on the next one, that would be awesome. And plus, my brain can only handle so much at once, Scott. We had a couple big topics here.
All right, I hear you.
So, guys, if you enjoy this stuff, Scott mentioned his book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, where some of these figures came from. You can go to byobbcoach.com. You could go to, we'll put a link to our affiliate code or affiliate link to the Amazon, where you can find the hardcover book. And, of course, we talked a lot about Fortitude Training. So check out fortitudetraining.net. And as always, guys, if you guys enjoy our content, if you want to support us, then do us a favor, give us a like. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And check out our sponsor, TrueNutrition.com, because they've got some kick-ass supplements, and use our code ADVICES. Dr. Scott, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yep. See you guys next time.
See you guys.